We're on item 9. We've commenced item 9 with the submissions of the City Centre Advisory Board and the Waitemata Local Board, and we'll now hear from our staff. Principal writer and leader of this body of work is David Rankin from Panuku. We have to his right, our left, Daniel Newcomb from Auckland Transport and George Weeks from the Auckland Design Office. Welcome to you all, and David, your call.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So today, I guess, marks the culmination of a series of workshops, as you noted earlier, really to, I guess, make publicly available a lot of the information that has been built up and discussed with you informally, and to enable us to get some decision making to enable ongoing progress and momentum with the finalisation of the strategies and with implementation. As has been noted already, a singular feature of the work to date, and I think a major improvement on past practice, has been a genuinely whole of council family approach to this exercise. It's not that it didn't happen before, but I think the level of interagency working together has been at another level altogether on this occasion, and I think we're all seeing the benefits of that approach. Far more sort of transparently and explicitly, all of the projects being looked beyond simply their functional purpose and a much more considered approach to the general impact projects are having on other functions and activities and on city building generally. It's also important to note that while this has been framed as an update of the City Centre Master Plan and Waterfront Plan, it has very much been a focus on implementation. What have we achieved so far? What's the next stage of implementation, rather than a blue sky start again approach. So very much it's been what needs to be updated from the strategic and planning framework that was already in place and is generally considered to have been successful, and how do we deal with some of the issues that have become apparent. And as I guess came up quite a bit during the workshops, what we are grappling with really is the phenomenal success of the strategies that have been implemented quite steadily over a long period of time. If you think about the original big picture, it was to rejuvenate our city centre, to open up and rejuvenate the waterfront, and to get a big switch to public transport into and out of the CBD, supported by significant investment. So we wanted more public transport usage, we wanted more people in town, we wanted more residents, more visitors, more businesses, more visitors, and to an extent we wouldn't have imagined, say, a decade ago, those strategies and the investment that has supported them have paid off spectacularly, and we are now looking at the next generation of supporting and responding to those growth pressures and continuing to build the city centre that was the original vision. I guess what's come through very strongly in our workshops is that we are planning and implementing in real time. There's a lot of stuff going on, and we are looking at the need for more projects to be started soon. And we've, I think, outlined for you a lot of the complexities of that because of the way these projects impact on each other, compete for the same resources, the need to get the sequencing right so that we don't unnecessarily disrupt the working of the CBD, and how the family as a whole, manifesting itself in decisions by the governing body here, rations out scarce and highly sought after space in the city centre, particularly midtown, downtown, at the water's edge, and how we're going to ration a limited sum of dollars, both between those projects that are here in the centre, but also as between these projects we're focused on at the moment and all the other projects in the region. So process terms, you can see what we've done is picked up the plans that were there from 2012 and really, as I said, updated them as necessary to respond to some changed circumstances, much more success than we envisaged, the implementation that's already taken place, and what we now understand about what should happen next. And that too, Mr. Chairman, is an important point, because compared to 3 or 4 years ago, we collectively understand a lot more about issues like, well, a good example would be the Quay Street seawall than we did. So we've got a much better base of information to work from in terms of how we successfully roll out the program going forward. In terms of what we're asking for today, just switch to the next slide. The key thing is really to sustain the momentum. We don't have time to sort of sit back and put everything on pause. We need to keep on working through the right balance of thinking for the medium and long term, but also getting the decisions that we need and the clarity about priorities to enable us to get on with things that need to happen in the next year or two. And coming in over the top of a lot of that thinking at a reasonably advanced stage of our process has been the America's Cup. So it is important, even though some of these things might seem a little way into the future, to enable us to plan our work and allocate our resources with confidence, which is why we're asking for a number of the decisions that are captured in the comprehensive set of recommendations that are in the report. But essentially, if I were to summarise them, it's seeking approval for the updated implementation of the 2 core documents which came about as flow on from the Auckland plan. We're looking for the governing body to sign off its comfort with the fundamentally important transport projects that I guess predominantly manage the enormous growing flow of buses in the city and balancing that with people. And we're shaping, I guess, the material that's going to be coming to you in a few weeks as you get more solidly into the long-term plan, because without additional funding, obviously the momentum in this part of the city will be lost. So I think at this point, Mr. Chairman, I'll switch over to George, who will run you quickly through a few more slides as a further bit of context.
Thank you, David. George.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everybody. I've now got about 6 minutes to remind everyone about the current context and the emerging implementation plans for the city centre and waterfront, some of which we've touched on in earlier presentations this morning. Now, most of you will be familiar with the fact that Auckland city centre produces a fifth of the region's gross domestic product. It's a major economic engine powered by thousands of skilled and highly productive jobs, and it's intensely compact, 0.08 of the Auckland area, but it underpins the economy, both of the Auckland region and the whole of New Zealand, and it's becoming ever more important, and not just as a place to work. We've already covered how Auckland city centre is blossoming into a place to live. More people living there than driving in during the morning peak, and new residential developments going up all over the city centre with population growth 15 years ahead of predictions. And more people will be able to come to Auckland city centre as well. The new bus network, City Rail Link and mass transit will mean thousands more people coming to the city centre by public transport every day. The new bus stops and transit stops, railway stations will be like fountains of pedestrians. Thousands more people flowing from them into central Auckland and bringing life to the heart of the city. But the public realm needs to work harder and integrate public transport into the public realm. This is also true at the waterfront, where as well as rail and buses, we also have more and more ferries and more cruise ships, and one of the busiest cycleways in Auckland and one of the most important pedestrian connections in Auckland. Key Street's already, in effect, a major transport interchange, and it will become more important. But it's also the global face of central Auckland, and it deserves a really first-class public realm. The city centre responds exceptionally well to public funds, which catalyse private investment, as we've seen in Wynyard Quarter, where an initial investment has led to almost $800 million of private investment, 15,000 people working here, a new part of Auckland city centre that did not exist a few years ago. External events are also important. We've heard about the America's Cup. We're assuming that Auckland will host the America's Cup and the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation in 2021. The city centre will be in the world's focus, and it needs to look good and work well, and we should maximise the legacy of these events. The other main consideration is construction sequencing. We can use existing construction disruption, as we see here at CRL, to help deliver other projects, but these construction windows are narrow. Our last report on the city centre master plan and waterfront plan was in March this year. Since then, we've examined the emerging issues in a series of structured workshops to identify a combined integrated vision for the future of Auckland waterfront and the city centre over the next long-term plan period. So I will now just quickly outline the visions for each of the four focus areas, and these are the downtown waterfront corridor, the midtown area, the central wharves, and Wynyard Quarter. And all of these have been developed through cooperation across the Auckland Council family and with other stakeholders. For downtown and the waterfront, a sequenced programme of high-quality transport and streetscape will deliver new civic space in Lower Queen Street and Central Quay Street, and better public transport to the east and west. The overall vision is centred on delivering a coherent public realm via a series of coordinated steps in collaboration with adjacent private sector actors, seamlessly integrating transport and public realm. In Midtown, we've heard about working with Auckland Transport to deliver a vision for two great city streets, Victoria and Wellesley Streets. As the City Rail Link, the mass transit and new buses bring floods of people to the heart of Auckland, Victoria and Wellesley Streets will connect people to their city centre destinations, like a east-west pedestrian ladder, construction coordinated with City Rail Link, enabling the staged delivery of Victoria Linear Park, a beautiful east-west link across the city centre, and allowing Wellesley Street to be the main east-west bus link, coordinated funding allowing the movement elements to be matched by pedestrian place improvements, turning Wellesley Street into a new kind of civic space, a bus boulevard. Central Wharves, where Auckland really shows itself off to the world, and it's Auckland's key waterfront gateway with numerous uses in a very constrained spatial environment, and we've got a proposed staged delivery of additional waterfront public space and new ferry infrastructure, and further cruise infrastructure in the long term. Captain Cook Wharf remains the optimal option for this, but does require negotiations with Ports of Auckland, who will be invited to a planning committee workshop in the near future. And finally, Wynyard Quarter. Key drivers include the information about the growth of the city centre and the strategic need for a new city centre park, alongside major transport proposals for Wynyard Quarter, and the preferred direction proposes realigning the Wynyard Point Park and connecting it to Daldy Street, Linear Park and Victoria Park. So, I mean, to conclude, this is a really exciting time for central Auckland. We've got a clear vision for implementing the city centre master plan and waterfront plan with great public realm integrated with public transport, bringing benefits not just for central Auckland or even just the Auckland region, but for the whole country. So I will hand over to David just to round things off and where to go from here. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, George.
There's probably not much more needing to be said, Mr. Chairman. As I said at the outset, the recommendations have been designed to try and, if you like, grip up all that we can from the material covered in the workshops. Picking up, which this slide illustrates, the interdependencies and complexities of projects and the need to both prioritise and implement in a careful way, recognising all those interdependencies. These recommendations give us some clear pointers, carrying on with the public engagement needed on things like the park at the waterfront, and put some shape around the prioritisation debate around these projects that will be taking place in the context of the LTP workshops. So probably, Mr. Chairman, it's best that we hand over now for questions.
Thank you. And Daniel, your matters have been addressed through George in part. Thank you. So members, at the outset, I would like to move, and it's seconded by the Mayor, the recommendations as they are from our joint staff, the joint staff recommendations, and it's A through to F, and I will move those, seconded by the Mayor, but also want to signal to you that I have received 2 amendments that are proposed to be put as amendments by addition, and I will put those on the screen so you can digest and consider those 2 amendments. And one is from Councillor Hills. Do I have can I take the second now? Do you have a second for your amendment, Councillor Hills?
Yep. I'll second it.
Councillor Kathy Casey, thank you. And then the other one is amendment by addition as well from Independent Māori Statutory Board Member Tauhenare. Do I have a second for that? Councillor Professor Collins, thank you. So I want to I think we might consider the amendments after we've taken questions, members. So we'll take questions of staff now, commencing with Councillor.
I just have some amendments for option 1.
Can we have those in writing and bring them up? Okay, and we'll, that's the first time I've seen them, so I'll just read those. Do you have a question at this point?
No, I just wanted to.
Okay, well, I'll consider those and put them up as well. Councillor Clough, thank you. Questions at this time, members, on the report, and then we can interrogate the amendments that are put before us and then come to the substantive. I'll take, I've got Councillor Casey, Member Henare, and then Councillor Hills.
David, a couple of questions. The one worry I've got, and it's the elephant in the room, if we go to the long-term plan with whatever we decide today, and then the America's Cup decides something quite different that's in opposition to what the public want or don't want, how's that going to work? Or is the America's Cup plan going to be ready for the LTP? I just don't understand how we're going to do this. I've got a couple of questions.
Yeah, the work will have to commence, implementation work will have to commence on providing for America's Cup bases pretty quickly, and so the decision-making time frame is envisaged to be within the time that would fit in interactively with the council's LTP process.
So when we go out to the LTP, it'll be with the America's Cup proposal?
That should be nailed down by that point, yes, given that we've got to have bases ready by mid-2019, which doesn't leave a lot of time to get stuff built.
Well, just on that then, having heard the Waitemata Local Board and having heard the City Centre Advisory Board and having heard councillors' concerns at workshops, why are you still recommending the Halsey Wharf option for the super yachts?
For the super yachts, I think it's important to put Halsey in its context. Halsey was put in the 2012 waterfront plan as a fairly conceptual idea and is what I would call of a future-proofing nature, because even back then it was apparent that there was going to be a significant ongoing pressure on the waterfront as a space as time goes on, and it actually had a time frame for something to actually happen around that concept in about 2032 or in the decade that followed it. So it was never envisaged to be something that was needed tomorrow, and nor was it ever something that had a sharply crystallised pressing need to be done tomorrow. Rather it was, if anything, if we've learned anything from what's happened, it is that we are being caught by the need to provide for growth that's much more significant than we might envisage. And so it was put into the 2012 plan. It attracted very little comment or attention, and as a bit of future proofing, we have simply left it there as part of this process to date. But as I say, there's also been no move to try and move to bring that forward before the sort of 2030 plus time frame. So that's why it's still there, Councillor.
So if it's effectively removed by Councillor Hill's amendment today, it won't be available then for the America's Cup proposal?
Well, that's for you to decide. In terms of, if you're asking about how it's been envisaged for the America's Cup, the picture that I think we see is there are goodness knows how many competing ideas for locations for America's Cup, and every one of them, when you look at it in a balanced way, has pros and cons. So we've certainly been reluctant to be ruling in or out any options. A lot of work has been put into the development of some decision-making criteria, which we shared with you at the workshop, because unless there's some consensus around how we will make a decision, then everyone's going to pick their own sort of location and not be thinking necessarily about the bits that aren't quite so important from their perspective, or may not even be aware of some of the many issues that are pros and cons with all of these options. So we are underway with that work. We're sharing those criteria around with some of the stakeholder groups that have made representations to you, because we need a maximum buy-in, I guess, to the set of rules we're going to apply as to how we're going to pick a location. Otherwise it'll be impossible to get anything approaching a consensus on the best way forward. And that's a particular risk when you think about how quickly we're going to have to move as a region and a country on providing for this physical stuff. So we haven't ruled Halsey Street out. There are different people in Panuku with different views. There are different people in the council with different views. We all know that, and we're trying to keep everybody focused on a sound and robust decision-making process, which will lead to wherever it gets to, and then ultimately the governing body will have to make a decision, I guess, in some interactive process with the Crown about what it's going to be and how it's going to be paid for.
So the answer is yes?
My answer is what it is, Councillor.
Thank you, Councillor Casey. Leading question at the end there. Members, if we could just restrict, and you have been to date, at this stage, even though we've got a motion moved and seconded, I do want to consider the amendments together, and maybe we incorporate, maybe we don't, but at this stage if we could pose questions, and then we'll move into debate. And I next have Member Henry.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Kia ora, David. I want to focus on just the Māori impact statement. Do you think that the engagement process has been robust?
Yes, there have been two primary forms of engagement to date. One has been the Panuku Mana Whenua Forum, which has covered a lot of the plans and indeed projects and concepts. What I'm not so familiar with, but I have had information on, is that the CRL forum has been used as a vehicle because it was there and seen as a credible entity, was being used for some of the midtown dimensions of what we've been talking about. So from what I understand, there has been a lot of engagement. What I think is missing, and I participated a couple of weeks ago in one of the Panuku Mana Whenua Forum, where we got this articulated clearly, and that is that there's a sense of a lot of stuff going on in a lot of different places. People are being engaged, and we possibly need one council family iwi forum to look at some of these bigger picture things in a coordinated way before they then break down through the delivery agencies into the normal kind of way we each do projects and engage with Mana Whenua at that time. So I think to date the answer is yes, but we are aware there's an improvement that needs to be made, and that's being thought about right now.
In terms of 67, it says Mana Whenua have made a significant contribution to the planning, design and development work, but it doesn't really give anything else about what that significant contribution is. I mean, I'm trying to, it's a nice platitude.
Well, there is quite a lot of specific contribution that have been made. We actually sent a note to Brandy a while ago with some of that. I can read through this or send it to you, but there has been quite a substantive contribution made into both.
Well, the problem is that we wanted some information, and we, I shouldn't go into statements. I should keep questions.
But you're a member, Henry.
Well, that doesn't mean a hell of a lot these days.
Okay.
No. Have you had any views expressed about a Māori cultural centre or a Māori tourism centre down the bottom of town? Anybody put that across the table?
Yes, I recall there have been what I would call thoughts of that nature expressed. I don't recall seeing what I would call a proposal, but as a concept, yeah, those ideas have been floated, and I think we're very open to considering those when we get to that point in the planning process with things like the whatever the long-term cruise facility would be.
Yep. Do you know? Sorry, Mr. Chair, I've only got 2 or 3 left. Do you know what the Te Aranga design principles are?
Certainly.
Do you use them?
Yes, we do, and I think the council family does.
Have you used them in this this particular?
Well, where projects are at implementation stage, as appropriate, yes. Because what we need to remember that what's covered in this report is a bunch of projects that some have been implemented, some are being implemented right now, and some are ideas that are seeking funding.
Yeah.
And so, for example, Panuku has quite clear protocols around the use of te oranga and to when and how and how we decide with Mana Whenua where that will be used, and as do the other implementation agencies.
I suppose my last, actually second to last question is if you were to go up into space and you would think to yourself, what's different between what is being proposed here than anywhere else in the world? What's different?
Well, Auckland has its unique characteristics and personality. I guess what could be behind your question, obviously, is the uniqueness of the Indigenous people here and how we reflect that in the both in our planning and in
Got that one right?
yeah. Obviously, it's not probably the only thing, but it's clearly a very
only thing.
It's a significant thing, and certainly I know enough about how all these things are being implemented in the debate around the plans to know that that is a very real consideration in the thinking.
Okay, last one is about 69. The Panuku Mana Whenua Forum has noted that it's difficult to make comment on detailed implementation of waterfront projects while there are unresolved Treaty of Waitangi claims. I'm not sure whether I understand that. I mean, it would seem that the unresolved treaty claims are being used as a sort of, well, we can't go any further, we have to settle those first, sort of issue.
Well, perhaps the best example I can give you is one I've been a bit involved in myself, which is Panuku has been endeavouring for a while to get a resource consent for the pole, what's known as the pole mooring project, which is a reclamation and extension of the West Haven Marina.
Yep.
And these issues have been front and centre in terms of our dialogue with Mana Whenua, and issues of ownership, funding and the like. And there've clearly been some indications that there are issues of principle that might apply to other projects that will flow from these initiatives. So it is very real.
But you can't make a decision because
we're not saying that at the moment. It's just, I suppose, from the point of view of implementation, it's one of the issues that we have to manage our way through.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hill's question?
Thank you, Chair. I just have questions for Daniel, and I know you guys have worked really hard to try and make space for Linear Park and other things, but two questions. Is Quay Street East the only possibility for the buses to terminate there? And the other issue I have is although the resolution says subject to further consultation, investigation and completion of business cases, will there still be an option of the Wellesley Street slip lanes near the university to be investigated at the same time? I know the university isn't keen, but to me I worry about the cost, even though if there's creative solutions, I worry what just going and investigating the university station or the Grafton Gully option is, if there's other more reasonable options.
Yeah, sure. So the first question about Quay Street East, the current proposal, I don't know if you can flick up to that one so we can have a look at the plan that we had before. Some people this morning have talked about the compromises. I think Shale mentioned it at least once. So maybe not compromise, but the challenge of working in a very complex, busy city centre environment. We have looked at a number of alternatives for managing the bus network. So that one just there. So you can see there's a kind of a teardrop roundabout proposed on Quay Street for the buses to be able to come and drop people off, turn around and go back without entering the core pedestrian people-focused space. We have looked at that kind of facility being placed on Customs Street, on Commerce Street and around. Our challenge is that always comes at other compromises, other impacts directly on pedestrian space, or on the other movements. If you put that on Customs Street, for instance, that just pushes more traffic onto Quay Street, which we don't want. So we've landed as a council family on that being the preferred way forward. We will have to justify that on an ongoing basis that it works and does what we want it to do, but it's based around people, not around the bus. It's not an optimal bus outcome, but it's the best for the city centre. In terms of the Wellesley Street situation, the arrangement that we proposed is again, the emerging preferred option. We don't intend to go back and revisit the slip lane or the Linear Park, the Victoria Street alternatives, only other than just to rule them out by comparison and justify what we're currently doing. in the business case world, we will have to justify that we are still doing the optimal solution. The university remains a stakeholder we have to deal with, but as you mentioned, we do think the emerging preferred option with the university station is a very good one for the city centre. It achieves transport and city centre outcomes, so I'd be very surprised if there's any challenge to that.
If, sorry, just one more question, Chair. So if the university option becomes too expensive or unworkable, you know, can it sort of still be maybe drafting an option with the Wellesley slip lane and Simon Street? You know, look, just because, yeah, I worry that we narrow the focus and it becomes, yeah.
So we have looked at the potential, because it is an expensive option to do a new facility where previously we didn't need one. I think if it became that much of a challenge, we would just look to scale down that facility as best we can and retain the general approach and the general intention, rather than go back to what was publicly consulted on and found to be unsupported. So the way forward from Auckland Transport is the new linear park supporting, public feedback supporting approach, and we'll find the best way through that with our stakeholders. I can't see a situation. It will be a challenge to make that work and make it a fundable situation, but I think there's enough support from this committee and others to make that work.
Yeah, oh, sorry, and to clarify, I wasn't talking about moving it back to Victoria, I was just talking about...
Oh, the slip lane. Yeah, in all situations, I think we carry on with that as a preferred option.
Thank you. Mayor Goff?
Thank you, Mr Chair. What we've got is some really good recommendations here, and that's why I've seconded them. I think it's really exciting for the city. There's two things we don't have here. We don't have a funding estimate, and we don't have a time frame. And I presume both of those things are deliberately not there because they'll be dealt with in the long-term plan. But my first question is this. I presume that this can be extended over a period of time that may be necessary in order that we have the funding to meet the costs. That almost goes without saying, but that's the intention. It's not simply something that'll go within the 10-year budget.
No, I think we're aware that these things have to be prioritised, and I guess what we've focused on is trying to make sure that everyone understands the trade-offs and the implications of doing certain things and not doing certain things, and to understand that it would make sense financially and in other ways to group certain things together. But they're all ultimately trade-offs and choices.
Okay. My second question is much more specific, and it's really around the Captain Cook Wharf proposal, because we heard earlier both from Waitemata Local Board and from the Central City Advisory Board that their preference would be a cruise ship extension on Captain Cook Wharf, but also that as a base for the America's Cup. And this question is premature because we've set up a committee to look at all of the options, so we don't have any of the evidence and we don't have the backup material we need to make a decision. But couldn't you assume that, presuming that we want to hold on to the America's Cup, and we could be having competitions here for the next 4 years, 8 years or 12 years, that those two objectives will clash? That if you need the Captain Cook Wharf for cruise ships, we've doubled in the last 10 years to over 100, we'll double at least in the next 10 years, that there'll be a clash of objectives. So we cannot use Captain Cook Wharf both for cruises and for the America's Cup base.
So Captain Cook Wharf is one of the, in that list I referred to, that's going to be assessed against the criteria. Certainly your point about how you would reconcile over time America's Cup challenges with would tend to come at the same point as peak cruise season. That's an issue. Another point, I guess, is to be viable for this coming challenge would require Captain Cook to be released pretty quickly, and one would sense, based on past experience, that would be a challenge.
They know what you mean.
So it's there, and I think the sort of point you're making is one of the issues that's, if you like, a con.
Thank you. Reserve the right to speak, Mr.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor Goff. Councillor Hulse.
Thank you. Mine follows on from the Mayor's question. It's almost a question of talk us out of Captain Cook Wharf, given the fact that there is the ability to utilise Marsden, which may not have a long future for some temporary structures. So I follow the Mayor's line of question, and the thing I'd like to raise, Mr. Chair, is somewhere there's an intersect between what cruise ships need and what America's Cup might need. What are the opportunities for looking at a long-term benefit for cruise that deals in the shorter term with America's Cup? Because I hear very clearly from our previous presenters the concerns around Halsey Street, and I know that Councillor Hills is going to raise those issues when he speaks.
So other than just generally caution about sliding into the America's Cup location decision, because the best way to deal with that is probably once we've applied the criteria and we can all see. But Mr. John Smith, I think you're probably able to add a bit more value to that than I can.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Councillor Darby. If I understand the question correctly, Councillor Hulse, we do face that dilemma that if we need to repeat the defence of the America's Cup over a number of sequences, then it does have impacts on what we might otherwise see as the legacy outcome of investing in that form of infrastructure. And that issue is taken care of within the criteria that we've developed for assessing the America's Cup bases. And it is potentially an issue that allows us both to think that we're investing in infrastructure that's for the long-term benefit of Auckland, but also we need to understand that if we can't actually get access to those legacies within a reasonable time frame, then it is to some extent sterilising some of that investment. So it's a really tricky issue, and it comes into play in all of the locations that have been raised within this report and by the local board and the City Centre Advisory Board. And I think everybody is being a little bit taxed by how to actually deal with that. And as David mentioned, it's probably a little early to actually come to grips with that until we have actually gone through applying the criteria and being able to bring to you where that actually leads us to as an answer.
Okay. Thank you. I think, Mr. Chair, the complexity and the number of moving parts in this is well acknowledged. I think as a council, we may have to make that really difficult call on how we prioritise America's Cup investment long-term as we might want it to be over the legacy elements and the risks of sterilising an area for what is essentially, and I acknowledge this might be heresy, what is essentially a once every 5 years or whatever sporting experience. Like, you know, the rest of Auckland will hate me for saying that, but somewhere, you know, it's very exciting, but let's not put at risk an extraordinary piece of infrastructure that could be available for the rest of Auckland in perpetuity if we get it right. So it's just manage our expectations around America's Cup. And my final question is, at some stage we will need the real facts and figures around the super yacht industry. I'm not quite as dismissive of the ability for the super yacht industry to contribute to the economic future of Auckland. I know a hell of a lot of people out my way out west are actually involved in refitting and servicing the super yacht industry, and I think we just need to caution a little bit before we sort of fling it away as something that's just a rich person's sport. It might be a rich person's sport, but it's certainly certainly is supported by our community. The question is, when will we get those figures? And the question's to you.
No, I'll direct it to the staff in terms of that. Thanks very much.
Are you asking that, Councillor, in the context of the Halsey Street?
I am, because I think until we have those kind of figures clear, we're going to keep pushing the decision away.
Yeah, we probably weren't, as I was, I guess, intending to convey earlier, we probably weren't intending to do a whole lot of work in the immediate future on the future proofing of Halsey, because it's not going to be prioritised for this LTP. It's always been envisaged to be something much further out unless that story gets complicated by the America's Cup debate. So at the moment, we're probably not planning anything on that because it's just too far out, and we don't think we don't think there's the funding there, and we doubt that there's any public buy-in to the need for something that's really at the moment future-proofing.
Thank you. Councillor Filipino.
Thank you, Chair. David, so look, I just want to carry on from Councillor Hulse. So the Horsley Street one, because obviously with the amendment that's up there, so it's in the waterfront plan just as a safeguard for now, and it's looking at 32 to 42 is the first indication in regards to the possible extension. So the only difference is going to be what happens around the America's Cup, and whether that then gets accelerated, for want of a better term, through to 2021. Will the Horsley Wharf extension only be for super yachts? Is that the only reason that it'll be extended?
As what was envisaged in the 2012 plan, I think that was put there as a concept, if you like. there's no business case behind that, and whether at the end of the day, as time evolves over the next 5, 8, 10 years, that's the needed for that. Whether there's something else needed or whether it's not needed at all is yet to unfold.
Okay, and Chair, the reason I asked that the context I asked that question is because everybody's, even in the report, it's around Horsley Wharf Extension super yachts, that's all I'm hearing. This is the reason why I asked the question.
Yep.
Supplementary question, in regards to the amendment that's up there, David, if that goes through, what happens in regards, I'm assuming then that the waterfront plan, that basically gets taken out of that, it gets taken out of any future proofing that there may be. So that's one question. Is
That's
that
correct. Yeah, that's
that
correct.
happens?
If it's taken off, it's taken off.
Yep. And so second question through you, Chair, is that if it does and it is successful, what happens then if in the next year or two it's, well, hey guys, we need to end up doing it, it then gets brought back through to here via the advisory, the Auckland City Centre Advisory Board?
Well, I guess it is a fact that it can come out and at some future point, 5 years
Be
or
put
whatever,
back in?
someone can put it back in for something. Yeah,
Okay.
that's the nature of future proofing.
Thank you. Councillor, Member Blair.
Oh, kia ora, David. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just follow up from Member Tauhinari. I guess we're getting some conflicting information that the Mana Whenua Forum engagement is successful. And I'm just wondering how you gauge success in terms of the information you receive and who the authorities are that are around that forum. Because in a forum, so I'm wondering how you gauge that success, whether it's signed off by the authorities, because the iwi authorities are quite sophisticated these days with commercial boards and as well as environmental teams. So I'm just wondering how you get that sign off.
Well, I think the nature of my answers was, had there been what I would call credible and full engagement with iwi, and certainly insofar as the work components undertaken by Panuku, I'm personally confident with what I know that we've interacted with that in the same way we interact with our iwi forum on all plans and projects of significance. I'm not personally so familiar with the other forum I referred to, but I've had information and had someone check it that there's been extensive engagement. If in fact we've got a difference of view about the effectiveness of it, I think probably we need to come and have that discussion with you, because everyone in this team thinks that there has been a lot of engagement. The process hasn't been such of getting sign-offs, because we're not at that point where we're looking for agreement to specific things beyond the normal implementation of projects. But and I also just note again that we're aware that there is this unfulfilled request at the moment for a more cohesive overall forum to stop the number of different sessions and forum people are getting involved with. But we certainly genuinely think that the engagement to date through those two mana whenua forum has been substantive and meaningful.
Okay, just as a follow-up, would you consider, as opposed to a forum where everybody's in one room, because there's different interests involved there, as reflected in the notes, would you consider direct engagement with each of the mana whenua groups as a way to progress and get sign-off or consultation?
So just to be clear, in respect of the Panuku Forum, all of the iwi in the region are represented on that, and we have good levels of attendance at our forum. Is there anybody here that's familiar with the other one? No? No.
Yeah, just with that, David, I know that there's a couple that aren't.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm suggesting.
So look, in principle, yes. I'm a little bit cautious about the answer because we could lead to a situation where that gets pretty difficult to resource properly, and a lot of one-on-one discussions might not be the best way to try and reach agreement on some of these overall big picture strategies and directions. But I know that when it comes to implementing particular things, there is a lot of one-on-one engagement with iwi where that's appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Member Blair. Councillor Simpson? Oh, myself, sorry. And no, Councillor Simpson, I called you first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you probably heard my transport question with regards to the other group. So sorry, I'm interested in is the concept that we don't have vehicle. Where is the vehicle movement east-west in the plan? I note that you say on point number 22 that traffic volumes have remained static for a decade. I'd like to have those figures if I may. But yeah, I know that there are 30,000 traffic movements along Tamaki Drive, which drop down to about 27 once you get to Commerce Street. If you're going to stop traffic, vehicle traffic, if it's static and it's still going to be those kind of numbers, what is the route to go east-west? That's my first question. My second question is how are we modelling value for money outcomes in this proposal, or even the GDP increases? And my last question is, are you aware that Ngāti Whātua is looking at some sort of tourism cultural facility, either on the whenua or or on the landing, which is a few minutes away from the CD? Are you aware of that? So those are my three questions.
So I can answer the transport-related part of that. So the approach for the transport for the city centre is we've had for the last decade static traffic volumes, but large growth in public transport and walking and cycling, and we foresee that continuing, and that not just that the traffic volumes are static, but we see less traffic in the core because it is more painful to drive right through the city centre, so that traffic which has to go east-west will naturally choose the easiest route, and if that happens to be using the motorway ring or some alternative route, that's what they'll do. What we don't want is to have large volumes of traffic dragged through pedestrian-focused areas. So we see the predominant east-west route in the northern part of the city centre being Custom Street, and that's where it would be prioritised for movement. That's also a very critical north-south pedestrian route, people crossing to and from Britomart and places like that. So it can't be all about the traffic, but we understand that there's a network that we have to deal with. The core principle being that we want less through traffic on Quay Street, because that's more of the pedestrian waterfront promenade area. But we still need to have some traffic there to service Princess Wharf and Queen's Wharf and places like that. So we see there will be some residual traffic there. We've done modelling to test different alternatives. So long as we can keep Custom Street moving fairly well, there is enough capacity in that area for the foreseeable future. And what will happen is that, again, the traffic will stay overall level, but there'll be more and more people, and we'll want to protect and encourage the pedestrians to be there. So I think just it'll become a human behaviour reaction that if you don't have to drive right through town, if you've got an alternative, you'll take another way of getting there. And if you've got an alternative transport mode to get there, then you'll take that. where you put on a good public transport service, people are taking those.
Yeah, I'll talk to you more about that, because obviously if it's static and the public transport's going up, you've
Yes.
still got the same amount of vehicles, so there's something...
So I'm happy to
and
share
Custom
those
Street's
figures.
pretty tight now, okay. And then my next question on how we're modelling the value for money outcomes and the GDP growth potentially in this new model. Noting that value for money isn't just financial.
We do regularly measure economic activity and I think GDP in the city centre. Is someone? No? What's that?
There are a range of different details, but we don't specifics on these projects.
No. The general GDP figures aren't going to be sensitive enough to pick up the impact of these particular projects. And as we know, unfortunately, because of the way local government is funded in New Zealand, general growth and economic activity in our area doesn't readily translate to funding for projects.
That's the lowest.
But all these projects will have to be put through the normal business cases that implementation entities have at the point when we get to, where that's appropriate.
So we don't have a general value for money, sort of general overlay about, what is the value for money, and it's not financial. I don't want people to think I'm just talking about return on your investment, but it's more what is the absolute value for Aucklanders as a result of the investment and the spend. Are we doing a modelling around that?
Well, we do modelling on the outcome, so you would have seen some of the slides in the workshop, and I think there was one there this morning that show we know that as a result of the investments which have taken place, there's a lot more economic activity in the city, there's a much higher foot traffic, retail is significantly healthier than it was a dozen years ago, despite the intervention of the GFC.
We need to keep those measures, that's what I'm saying.
Correct.
We are keeping those measures.
We are.
Okay.
Yeah.
And my last question about the cultural...
Yes, I am aware of that proposed concept, I guess it is more, but...
It is a concept.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. Got a couple of questions around future-proofing. The first one goes to ferries. I note that it would appear that we're planning for a doubling by 2025. Having said that, I know from my experience around the Gulf Harbour ferry that it will likely double within the next couple of years. That's Gulf Harbour alone. If that sort of scenario plays out across the region, and there's no reason why it couldn't, are we going to have enough space and enough provision for ferries into the future?
John, do you want to do that?
I'm sorry, it'd be slightly unusual that the Auckland transport person's flicked to me on ferries, but I'll answer the ferry one. Because I've been working really closely with the ferry team within Auckland Transport, and where we are at the moment is that the ferry terminal itself has eight berths that cater for the current services, and they're intensely under pressure currently. So the plan is that that facility would grow to 12 berths, but the configuration of it actually allows it to be much more efficient than it currently is, which means that ferries don't actually have to spend as much time in each berth as they currently do. And effectively you get a lot more usage out of the same facility than the current configuration. And within the plan that we have, it's future-proof then to grow from 12 to 15 at some point in the future. So the numbers at the moment that Auckland Transport ferries have been looking at is that the ferry patronage would double by the middle of the next decade, and that the planned 12 berths that would figure on the western side of Queen's Wharf would be sufficient to cater for that, and it's future-proof then for further growth once that's finalised.
Okay, and the other question I've got just goes to future-proofing around climate change, coastal hazards, sea level rise, storm surge, and looking at the guidance for local government, coastal hazards and climate change that's just been leaked. And that would appear to suggest that there's going to be significantly more emphasis around various adaptive pathways, much more emphasis around resilience. Is this implementation future-proofed, and I don't see any mention of anything to do with climate change, sea level rise or the like in this report, other than a brief mention of the improvements to the seawall.
Well, I know those climate change implications are definitely taken into account by our planning team.
Okay, and what's the projection that we're looking at within that in terms of sea level rise?
I don't have that detail with me now, councillor. Is there anyone who can help a lot more with that? No. No. We'll have to follow that up for you, councillor.
I think we are following the NIWA projections, and that is, I think, a metre 2010 to 100 years hence.
Sure. I'm just referring to this report that I've read that mentions 1.9 metres, for example. So this situation is changing dynamically and very fast.
It is. Thank you. Councillor Watson?
Thank you. Just a quick question. During the Battle of Bledisloe, if I can put it like that, during the last term at council, one of the real concerns of the public was that sight line from Queen's Wharf down the Gulf to Browns Island. Does any of what's being proposed at Captain Cook impact on that? It's a little hard to get a sense of scale just by looking at the drawings, but if I look at what was originally proposed at Bledisloe and potentially a movement of the wharf and particularly big cruise liners, I kind of get the feeling that there could be some impact. Have we done any sort of work on sight lines in that specific location on that very important eastern tip of Queen's Wharf?
We haven't done any specific work on sight lines, but the proposed extension on Captain Cook doesn't bring it out, wouldn't bring it out anywhere near to the extent of the Bledisloe Wharf currently, and therefore that sight line, which takes account of Queen's Wharf to Bledisloe Wharf, wouldn't be impacted by that particular one. But as part of the implementation process, we would look at that particular aspect.
Thank you. Councillor Cashmore.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chair. David, just to do with D, and I have a great degree of sympathy for what Member Henry and Councillor Collins are trying to achieve, but it's fairly difficult to do a business case when you don't have anything to hang it on, I would suggest. So is this a little bit premature?
Well, I think it's really just asking us to consider the potential for those things as part of the thinking that it will evolve over time with Queen's Wharf and potentially a cruise terminal on Captain Cook. So it's just asking us to take those into account as we do that work as part of the business cases. So I don't see a problem with that.
Right, thank you. That's all the advice I needed.
Thank you. Final question from myself. There's a lot of discussion, David, about legacy. And I'm just wondering how Panuku view and understand legacy. George, your department as well. How you understand legacy. So does legacy include leaving things, respecting the natural composition that's there, rather than just building something that is going to be used in another way or adapted for a different use in the future? So I just want to get a sense that our staff that are working in this area, do they respect the word legacy as also leaving the natural systems and leaving the cultural footprint?
Very definitely. I mean, I think part of the work of any regeneration or comprehensive redevelopment agency is to always have as a starting point respect for both the community and people form that exists at the time, and also things like the natural environment and natural features that are there from the past. As we know, particularly in a dynamic, crowded urban environment, that can only ever be a start point, or you soon box yourself in. So we all accept that things have to change, but I guess there's an increasingly high threshold to just casually mucking around with the waterfront in particular, whether it's at Onehunga or here. So no, that's very definitely there as part of legacy. Part of legacy is also thinking about not spending money in a wasteful way where something is only used once. So what's the capacity for the use after the temporary use is gone, and are we building things in a way they can be repurposed? Are we doing things in a way that fits in with a well socialised and agreed long-term plan for an area, or are we just doing things in an ad hoc way? They're all part of legacy as well. And we're trying to take account of all those things, juggling all these complexities and pressures that are here now.
Thank you. So members, I think now we've exhausted the questions. I'd like to just get a sense from the meeting. I'm wondering whether some amendments might be incorporated, but I'll take your lead on this. I'm going to take them in the order that they have been received. Councillor Hills, Member Hanari, and then Councillor Close. Some are a little bit simpler than others may be. Let's see. Councillor Hills, do you want to just, before you speak to your motion, do you just want to very quickly outline and emphasise, I think you've added the words "at this time." When I spoke to you yesterday, it was full stop after extension. You've now added "at this time."
Maybe.
So if you can just very briefly outline, I'm giving you a little bit of extra opportunity to explain the motion before you debate the motion.
I sort of feel like I'd be doing both in that, but it's there, it's mentioned in the plan today. It's about kind of putting a line in the sand. We don't support it at this time. It might be a future thing, but I think it's our, city centre, and I don't know. I'm going to debate. It's hard to half debate.
Okay, can I just ask this question there? With the addition of the words "at this time," and we've heard that there's some work that I think commences this afternoon in an evaluation group that's being convened to look at locations for America's Cup. So that at this time, does that preclude something that might be brought out of the America's Cup's locations analysis?
I mean, I'm happy to say we do not support the Halsey Wharf extension, but I was trying to be reasonable with "at this time."
Okay, as of today, okay, and there might be other inputs. Okay, can I quickly go to the Independent Māori Statutory Board? So members, just to give you a sense from my chair position, I will be supporting the amendment by addition of Councillor Hills, and made a slight change, if you don't mind. I think it's assisted Independent Māori Statutory Board. It's to direct staff to consider the potential. You happy with those words?
Yes, sweet.
I would be recommending that for support 2 members. And it's not prescriptive, absolutely. It's looking at the potential and further work to be done. And then coming to Councillor Close amendment. Have we got that there, please? And I think that's consistent with the thrust of how the concepts are being designed for Quay Street. And then I've suggested that the word "removal" be added to the last line there. Councillor Clow, you're good with that? Any further explanation before you debate it?
I'm happy to be incorporated. I just wanted it as an amendment so that there would be emphasis on those two aspects to be taken into full consideration. That's all.
Okay, support that. You're happy for it to be incorporated? Yeah. So can we just take that one, and is there a general willingness to incorporate?
Why don't you incorporate all of them?
I'm just taking, thank you, Deputy Chair Casey. I'll incorporate that one, and can I incorporate yours, Member Henry?
Yes, sweet.
Incorporate. Is there a willingness to incorporate Councillor Hills?
I've got a problem with that.
Okay, I'm going to take Councillor Hills. It's moved and seconded. The other 2 are incorporated, and I'm going to take this as an amendment by addition. If this addition goes through, it does affect another small part. It does make, there's an adjustment. I did pick it up. Yeah, sorry, can you scroll that up again, please, so we can see it? If this does go through, then this needs to be changed as well.
This adds a B.
Because it's an update of the implementation plan. Councillor Hills, it's moved, seconded by Councillor Casey. Your call.
Thank you, Chair. No, I just wanted to put this up there, as this is our city centre and waterfront planning refresh. I think it's important that we give what we see as what we think our future of the waterfront should be. It's our direction, and even though it is in the, originally put in the decade 2032 to 2042, it is mentioned in here as part of the potential accelerated scenarios for the America's Cup. I think that adding the Halsey Street extension, and it was great to hear the chair of the City Centre Advisory Board and Cheryl Chambers, the deputy chair of Waitemata, all said similar things to what I was going to say, and I hadn't actually heard their views before. I had read that the City Centre Advisory Board had put a resolution up last month, almost the exact same as my C there. I think to do this, it would actually contravene everything we're doing in that space. It's putting something of that size in the middle of what we're creating as one of the most pedestrian-focused, park-focused, kind of recreation-focused areas of the waterfront, I think would be a massive, massive mistake. Not only is the sight lines, we're going to have the park eventually on Wynyard Point on that side looking across, and suddenly we've lost all the water view and the water in front, but also, it's 150 million probably that we'd have to move forward from a decade that's, 2 LTPs ahead and moving it into this one. Also, last year, going across the Wynyard Crossing was 1.34 million pedestrians. This year it's 1.9. So we've got 500,000 increase in pedestrians across that space in 1 year. We're also creating a fantastic pedestrian focused place on the other side from Britomart, and then eventually creating a Wynyard Point zone. But also, that's one of the most exciting places for people to visit now on the waterfront now, the Wynyard Quarter, Silo Park, all that area. I was there in Fashion Week last week. There's people everywhere. There's kids already, it's still pretty cold, but doing bombs into the water where the steps are. If we suddenly add something for the America's Cup, which it says here, we will contravene that whole space. I wouldn't expect anything else other than we'd have to put in traffic lights in that area to control the pedestrians like we do up Queen Street. If you have something 6 to 8 to 10 teams out on that wharf that we build, you'll have trucks after utes, cars, all the workers, everyone coming back and forth across that space, and you'll completely change the whole point of the Wynyard Quarter and all the investment we've done down there. If you look at ASB and the new hotel being built, it's a very, it's not a very wide space already. You can already barely get a car and a bus through there because its focus is on pedestrians down there by the waterfront theatre. I think we need to put the line in the sand and say this is not a good idea to put a massive structure like this, which will largely be, if it says in here it's for the America's Cup, it's going to be for people and workers and service vehicles that whole time. I also don't think the current Halsey Street Wharf is being used as well as it should be now. We've got the event centre there, but I've been down there several times in the last couple of weeks to check it out. It's largely cars, but most of it sits there empty. And it's sort of a little bit weird that we would, even think about extending it again. The other thing is, if we are looking to potentially Marsden or Captain Cook, then you've got all the access coming off the motorways and other places for those vehicles to come down and not messing with the whole city centre and everything we're doing. Yes, I know we can look for options. Yes, I know that there's a lot being done, but we need to put a line in the sand and say, why would we invest all this time and money and, basically from Wynyard Point through the new crossing that's on the books to build, and then to the viaduct, and then to the Quay Street, but then right in the middle we're going to stick something that will have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of vehicle movements across there and create what I think is not a good space for the future. So that's why I put it up. I think we need to say what we think is important. I don't think it's going to preclude the America's Cup at all, but it's important that other options are focused on strongly, and this isn't just seen as cool, we can easily build a wharf within the time, brand new out there, and then we're left with something I think is not good for that area. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hills. Are there other speakers to this amendment? Councillor Cashmore, and then the Mayor.
Thanks very much, Mr Chair. And, you know, my heart agrees with Richard, but my head says no. For the very simple reason, I think it would be unwise to exclude any potential venue until we actually know the details that surround the challenge. And we're not knowing that until the end of this month, I believe. There are also very serious constraints around time. You know, mid-2019, when the first races and the crews arrive on site, will be upon us in the blink of an eye, very quickly. So there may have to be an intermediary step before we have a more permanent solution as a home for America's Cup. We don't know that either yet. The costs are yet to be determined, but one would think the cost would be shared between the Crown, private enterprise and council. So the 150 million might be a little bit of a misnomer. And we also need to think really hard, and I know David and the team have done this, about cruise in the future. You know, cruise is growing rapidly. It's every 10 years it's doubling, and that time frame is condensing. It has to, no matter whose figures you take, they're very meaningful, and the growth is very meaningful. And I just believe we just need a bit more time. Let's get the actual figures, the realities, some more truths, understand what the challenge is going to be, and look at the time constraints for build, and come up with a solution for you, because there will be a solution. There might be a two-stage solution, but there will be a solution, and let's come out with the best outcome for all of Auckland.
Thank you. Other speakers to this? Oh, sorry, Mayor Goff. Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair. Look, I'm sympathetic to Richard's opinion and why he holds it, to Councillor Hill's opinion, I should say. But we all have opinions around this. What is really important is that we test those opinions against hard evidence. When we won the Cup, I think most of us around this table thought that this is a great opportunity for Auckland to showcase us not just as a beautiful harbour, which we are, but as a smart city that can produce world-leading technology. The decision to hold the Cup here has still not been made, and it will only be made if there is a suitable place to put the base. I asked our Chief Executive, Stephen Town, to work with a cross-council group to examine all options. I said everything's on the table. We've got strong opinions against some of the options. We've got strong feelings for some of the options. But you've got to look at every option. You've got to come back and tell councillors what works, and most importantly, what achieves the best ongoing legacy for Auckland. I'm not interested in funding the race. I am interested in an infrastructure legacy for Auckland in the same way that the Viaduct Basin was. Now, I've got opinions. I'd like to get rid of those bloody tanks despite the presentation today, the hazardous substances off the area that should be the Headland Park. You know, maybe this is a way we can bring that forward. I'd like to do Captain Cook Wharf. Maybe that's a way we can get the Crown to pay a good share of what we have to probably do anyway if it's to be used as cruise ships. But some of those opinions won't stack up. If we have the Cup defence here 3 times, that means we won't have a Headland Park, we'll have a base for ongoing Cup challenges, and I want a Headland Park. We need a cruise terminal that will cater for a situation where we'll have 4 or more ships a day in our ports, and we can't cater for them at the moment, and we'll be losing hundreds of millions of dollars if we can't do it. But I'm putting my opinions to one side and saying this group has to do a professional job for all of us, to look at the evidence, to look at the legacy, to look at what works, and come back and make recommendations. And in the end, this group will make a decision about whether their recommendations are in accord with our views, and we'll vote on that as is appropriate among democratically elected people. But if we start ruling out options now on opinions before we've looked at the evidence, we just make the job that I've given to Stephen Town almost impossible to do. He's got to come back and give us evidence-based advice, and then we've got to make a decision. Every other recommendation, and I strongly support these recommendations, are clear and strong and certain. This recommendation, by even including the word "at this time," indicates we're not certain about it. It is an opinion. It might change when we've got more evidence. Well, why would we put an opinion up that we're not certain about at this stage? Let's hear the evidence, and then let's make a clear and strong decision. But don't do it the other way around. It just doesn't make sense to make a decision before you've looked at all of the evidence and you can stack up one option against the other. We are preempting an option, maybe rightly, maybe not, but we don't do that until we have the evidence.
Thank you. Members, I'm supporting this motion. It's got a caveat on it. It's at this time. And while some other speakers have concluded that it's a shutout on America's Cup, I don't read it that way. The way the motion is constructed is a lot more than opinion. I think it actually voices a challenge that we've seen on Bledisloe. I think it voices the concerns of a phenomenal number of Aucklanders who have actually...
Point of order.
Point of order. What's your point of order?
Mr. Chair, can I just get clarification? A few minutes ago you took a call and I think you were making recommendations for us to support this amendment, which I have no problem with you doing.
What's your point of order?
But now you're speaking again. So what is the purpose of you speaking? Because you've already spoken.
No, I haven't spoken to the motion.
Yes, I think you
Have I spoken
did.
to the motion? No, I was clarifying, I was introducing the amendments. Thank you very much. So members, this echoes a lot of the discussion that's been around Auckland for the last, particularly the last 3-5 years. So I am supporting this on the basis that the Halsey Street extension came into the city centre, or the waterfront plan, very late in 2012. That was well articulated, and we were reminded of that from the chair of the Waitemata local board. It was a very late concept that was introduced, and it was identified to support fishing fleet and super yachts. There were no business cases. Mind you, there were no business cases on many other of the concepts that were brought forward for that particular master plan in 2012. We know now that the fishing fleet is in decline, and we understand that a lot of the fishing fleet is now working out of Manukau, attending to that quota on the western side, though there is a fishing fleet on this side that is berthed at Halsey Street and the surrounds there, and you can see them there. On the super yacht front, I've looked at the 2014 report on super yachts. We've heard that it's a $30 million business per annum. That is peanuts for Auckland, and when you look at that business case, some 35% of that 30 million is actually on lube and oil changes. No value added there. Refits account for only 20%, repairs and maintenance only account for 12%. There is no great business benefit to Auckland in parking up mega floating mansions on the waterfront that are owned by occasionally visiting oligarchs and sheikhs, etc. There is no real value. You don't obliterate your water space by prioritising it for the privileged. I think Aucklanders are demanding that we come with some very good evidence, and I'm not seeing it at the moment for the obliteration of that space. So there is room within this motion to take the locations analysis that we'll be receiving in a month or two ahead, that I understand commences this afternoon. It's signalling at this time that in terms of the updated implementation of the waterfront plan and the city centre master plan, as we have before us, that we don't see a future for an extension of Halsey Street. If we see some good hard evidence to support that in the future, let's reconsider it. At this time, we do not. Councillor Fletcher?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had intended not to speak because I'm aware that we are now 10 to 1 and we haven't got through the agenda very quickly, but I felt drawn to, I should have taken a question when questions were on and just sought clarity around the terms of reference of this committee and the decisions that we're taking here today. So while I applaud others putting ideas up, and I think that's fantastic, at the end of the day, anything of this nature will have to come back to the governing body in any event. And my experience is that council has not always been a strong negotiator, and I find myself in the same situation as the mayor and the deputy mayor on this occasion. Until we actually have all of the options, until we have all of the scoping and the brief on the table, we would be foolish in the extreme, especially as it will have to come back to the governing body anyway. So I find it really hard to understand why we've spent really nearly an hour on this today, and I would like to feel that good decisions will be made when we have good quality information. That is not here in this particular situation, and I would implore members to vote down this, however they may feel about Halsey Street, because I think this is just bad process here today.
Councillor Newman?
Yeah, well, Mr Chair, I mean, Councillor Fletch has effectively stolen my thunder on this, but I'd just like to apologise to those Aucklanders who work in industries that are based at Halsey and who I think are important and are relevant, and they need a future as well. So, without wanting to prolong this debate, Mr Chair, given that people have already spoken at this, some more than once, I think it's important that if we could just, rather than assigning an opinion in relation to Halsey right now, and this matter should come back to the governing body where I think it's appropriate for the debate to be had at that time.
Councillor Clow.
Certainly, I've heard, hands off our harbour and the Waitemata Local Board and the City Centre Advisory Group on their views on this. And to be quite honest, Halsey Wharf is not my, at this stage, but I want to be objective about it, is not my option for the America's Cup. However, I can't support this because I believe we've just got to leave all the options on the table. I think it's our fiduciary duty that we look at everything. And just to reinforce what Deputy Mayor said, I mean, we've just got huge growth options that we have to really be looking at, and going forward it may well be that we have to look at Halsey Wharf and way in the future, but then again if it comes up and an extension sooner rather than later with the assistance of the government or whatever, we've got to take that into account because our funding is pretty damn constrained. It's also, I can't support this. I certainly understand where the mover and second are coming from, but I won't be supporting it.
Councillor Filipina?
Thank you, Chair. Look, I did some sort of stuff around the boost for our economy, not only New Zealand but also Auckland, and there's a report that was done by the New Zealand Herald, that's Bernard and Eugene, and it just sort of highlighted $640 million came into the economy, but that was, and also thousands of jobs came through to New Zealand. But the interesting thing for me, the Auckland share was $473 million just for Auckland. And I mean, I think with this particular amendment here, it's sending the wrong message, I believe. And I mean, I'm just going to sort of just reiterate again that look, we need to keep this on the books. We really do. We need to keep this there as an option. And I think we just send the wrong message saying that, look, don't even go there, don't touch Halsey Wharf, because that's exactly what I think we're doing here, is saying, look, yes, we may end up, we still don't know whether it's going to come to Auckland, the defence of the America's Cup. We don't know. But the benefits that I sort of had a look at the article that was written in 2000, man, I'm saying, look, 423 in 2000. Man, you know, that's so for me, it just keeps it on the table. Who knows what we will do once we get the information, and this is the question why I asked David, who knows what happens when we get the information around where the America's Cup's going to be held? Who knows, we may end up saying no, Halsey Wharf's not going to get touched. Well then, let's make that decision then. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll put that to the vote.
By division.
Thank you. Councillor Casey's called for a division.
Councillors, you're voting on the amendment by Councillor Hills, as you see it on the screen. Chair Darby.
For.
Member Blair.
Against.
Councillor Casey.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
No.
Councillor Clow.
No.
Councillor Collins.
All.
Councillor Filipina.
Against.
Councillor Fletcher.
No.
Mayor Goff,
No.
Member Henry,
No.
Councillor Hills,
Or
Councillor Hulse,
Aye.
Councillor Denise Lee,
Against.
Councillor Newman,
Against.
Councillor Sayers,
Against.
Councillor Simpson,
Against.
Councillor Sir John Walker,
No.
Councillor Wayne Walker,
Yes.
Councillor Watson.
no.
Lost 6 votes.
Thank you, members. We'll now go, the others are incorporated, the other amendments are incorporated. We'll now go to the substantive